Okay, so we'll run the Sharon Fairly interview. It's about 20 minutes. It's really interesting. I think aldermen, people in the city council, the media are not really getting this whole like Proud Boy cop thing. It's about basically this conversation. While we don't talk about him specifically, is about an officer named Robert Baker who came up in the news as being affiliated or a member or a supporter of the Proud Boys, this white supremacist group that was heavily involved in the insurrection a mile from where I live now. And their Superintendent Brown said, we're going to root them out. We're going to get them all out. Really? How do you do that? Being a member of an organization like that probably isn't enough to fire them, and I don't know what membership means. So we're going to get into that with Sharon. I don't think it was discussed enough by the media. I don't think the media pushed Brown enough beyond the rhetoric, because that's all he gives is rhetoric. He's so shallow. There's nothing behind it. Anything he says most of the time. So I'm going to play the interview, and then I'll come back and discuss it. If you're watching us on Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, I want this to be interactive. Drop a comment in the chat or a question. I'm happy to answer them. This interview was canned, so for the next 20 minutes, canned, but I'll come back if you have questions about this interview. I'm happy to answer them. All right, I'm going to play the interview, and I'll be back on the other side. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sharon Fairly, former Chief Administrator of both the Independent Police Review Authority and the Citizen Office of Police Accountability. She stood up COPA in the transition from IPRA to COPA, and also now a law professor at the University of Chicago. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So here's my question. And in early June, there was an officer, and there's an officer, we don't even have to mention his name, Robert Baker, but I don't want to talk about him specifically. It came up in the news that he was supposedly affiliated with the Proud Boys, a white supremacist, overtly white supremacist organization. And they've made the news like crazy since the insurrection. And, they suspended him, and then Superintendent Brown came out and said, hey, I'm going to root these people out. And what I didn't understand is I'm not sure being affiliated with a loosely based organization where you're not a card carrying, donation giving person. I don't know what that is. And I don't even know if you're a card carrying member of an organization that has white supremacist views, if that's something that is actually they could investigate and then discharge you for. So the only rule violation I could think of was bringing discredit upon the department. Although I'm not sure how you actually connect him completely to the Proud Boys. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical, since both you have vast experience in this. Someone files a complaint against Officer Smith and says, he's a member of the Proud Boys. And I'll sign an affidavit. Here you go. You got the affidavit. Go get him. What is your response when you get that in IPRA or now COPA?
Right. So first of all, that kind of case is not exactly within the scope of the jurisdiction of IPRA or COPA, because unless they made unless it became verbal abuse, right? So IPRA and COPA has its specific jurisdictions. So many of these cases, and I believe in Baker's case, it's being investigated by the Bureau of Internal Affairs. So the question about whether or not someone can be sanctioned for being connected to a group like this, it really has to be proven that they've broken a departmental policy. Now, you pointed to the core one, which is Rule 2, which is any action or conduct that either brings discredit on the department or is inconsistent with the department's values and policies. And so that, though, requires a specific action or conduct. It's not just about association. So police officers have First Amendment rights. They have the freedom of speech, and they also have freedom of association, but it is not unlimited, right? There are some limitations on that speech and that association. For example, there is Rule 42 that prohibits police officers from the anti-fraternizing rule. They can't hang out with convicted felons, right, or convicted persons. And so that is an infringement on their freedom of association. But the two rules that really come up in this context are Rule 2, as we've said, which is an action or conduct that discredits the department, or Rule 3, which is a failure to promote the department's values and policies. So that would be sort of like an act by omission, right? And so, for example, where you have persons who may have, for example, gone to the January 6th riot, and even though they didn't do anything bad themselves, they stood by and watched as others were breaking many, many laws. That could be, for example, the basis for that kind of a violation, where you have failed to really stand up for the department's values and policies. And so it can't be just speech or association. It has to be speech or association that violates one of those rules that you can actually prove up in order to hold someone accountable in that way.
Right. So, like David Brown, we're going to root him out. And like, I don't want, I would like a country where the Proud Boy types organizations never existed. Right. And there were, and we got the people out of them and they all thought, white supremacists was bad. Well, how would you prove attack proving membership? And is membership enough?
Right. So like I say, I'm not sure if necessarily membership is enough unless, for example, you can prove that the group that they have become a member of is involved in illegal activity or is a group of convicted persons, right, which would break that specific rule 42 about being associated with convicted persons, or it would put you in a position of observing unlawful conduct that you have failed to do something about. So just pure membership in a group that takes certain views that we don't agree with. I certainly don't agree with them, and I certainly don't want to be have a lot of police officers who share those views, because part of the concern is that they, if you share in those views, then it's really hard for you to fulfill policing responsibilities in an ethical and constitutional way, in my view. And so that's really the question is, can you gather evidence that shows that that this person, by being associated with this particular group, is essentially not fit for the position, is not fit for office, right? They can't possibly be able to fulfill their duties in a fair manner. And so that's the kind of evidence that I think it would require in order to, for example, fire someone, right, for belonging to a group like this.
Yeah, and I thought, well, all right, if it becomes public that you're associated with the Proud Boys, it's certainly going to make your ability to testify in court around actions that someone of color did. It's certainly going to damage your credibility when it comes time to give testimony. I kind of looked at this. I saw this, and like, I'm not a fan of the Proud Boys, but I saw this the way I process this is, we're back to the 50s where this is a thing called, they labeled you a communist. Right. And that made you unfit for certain things. So I just saw Brown's like, we're going to root them out. I don't understand what that means. How would a police department go root out people that have these views? I'm not sure. Are you going to make them take some kind of survey or test to uncover these interviews? Are you going to put undercover people in the Proud Boys, join the Proud Boys and see if there's other cops involved? I've never understood that. Do you think there are ways? Can you think of ways from all your experience that a police department would root out officers that have this, so that if they're not overtly espousing these things on social media?
Well, I mean, I don't really know what activities they undertake in order to enforce. I'm sure there are, for example, social media policies, right, in place that they have to follow. And so I don't know what proactive programs that the department may be implementing in order to enforce those policies. It could be that they are monitoring social media sites for posts. That could be, I just don't know. I'm not sure what Superintendent Brown meant when he said root out. I guess what I take away from that is that this is an area of concern for him, and he wants to ensure that that department members are following the rules and the policies, these rules around not posting, communications that are inconsistent with the values of the department, because that undermines the respect that the community has for the department. And so that's very, very problematic. And that's why those rules are in place, right? Is that they recognize that the conduct of individual officers and how they conduct themselves, even when off duty, can have an impact on how the community views the department. And so that's why their First Amendment rights are not completely unlimited, right? They don't have as many rights as we do as regular people because of that as an issue. And so it could be that they're out there sort of looking for violations of these rules more proactively. I just don't know. I don't have any experience with that. So
I always thought, although incredibly hard, I think a precursor to all of this was Second City Cop Blog. Not so much the blog itself, although the blog obviously wasn't great, but sometimes they actually had legitimate complaints on there that they were able to document. So there's no doubt about that. But that comment section, almost all anonymous, um, it definitely set the stage. I'm a mile from the Capitol in the U.S. Capitol, not the Illinois Capitol. I have an extra special sensitivity for what happened on the 6th of January, considering many of them were out in front of our apartment building with their guns and camo that night, planting the flag of the Proud Boys. But hopefully Brown is taking this seriously. Hopefully the department is taking this seriously. I think January 6th was a little bit of a wake-up call of how much this type of thinking is embedded into our justice system and our policing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, I think that you're right. I think it was very much a wake-up call for many of us. And when you see that amongst the hundreds of individuals who have been investigated and many who've been prosecuted for criminal violations associated with the January 6th riot or insurrection, whatever you choose to call it, there were dozens of law enforcement officers. And we're talking about law enforcement officers from small cities and all the way to big cities, departments like the LAPD, all the way down to a small department in West Virginia. And many of those individuals are now facing criminal prosecutions. But it did sort of open our eyes to the extent to which these beliefs are held by a fairly large percentage of the population within law enforcement. And so that is concerning, because again, it undermines our trust in the ability of these officers to conduct policing in a way that's fair and constitutional. That's really the concern. But when you look at how these cases are playing out there, and they are just starting to sort of kind of come to fruition, if you will. We've just seen last week, for example, the first sentencing for one of the persons who's charged with a felony on the riot. But we do see departments holding their officers accountable. There were a couple of officers from Seattle for which they were sought to be separated from the department based on their participation in January 6th. Now, the allegations against those two officers was action, not just words, right? That they actually infiltrated within the perimeter, in a place where they weren't supposed to be. So again, that's action and conduct that's in violation of policies that they're being punished for, and the sanction is firing. So that department is taking it quite seriously. So we're just starting to see how these cases are playing out in real life.
Yeah, it's been, I think, what January 6th exposed, and I've always had this, had these dual thoughts in my head about how much of brutality around policing and bad shootings when they happen were based out of racism that led to white cops to fear people of color, especially men of color, and how much was racism that led them to hate, right? And I don't know if I've always thought we could kind of separate those two. Neither one is good. I've never fully thought this through, as you're saying. But I always thought there was a little bit of a difference there. I think what January 6th showed is maybe how widespread, even at a small amount, the hatred and white supremacy is through police departments throughout our country. So, and everyone's saying, well, you're saying 80% of the cops. I'm not saying anywhere near that. But even if it's a small percentage of every department or most departments around the country, that's incredibly dangerous for policing justice in this country.
Yeah, I think that you're touching on a really important point, Tracy, in that, sometimes we don't know what happens and we see these critical incidents, right? And we don't understand if they are the product of, explicit racism, implicit bias, lack of training. Sometimes it's just really hard to answer that question. And so that's the challenge that I think we all face in trying to devise police reforms that can address these more cultural issues. And they, obviously these things take time. But in the meantime, we've got to enforce rules, right? If we can't change these attitudes, right? Because sometimes it may be impossible to change someone's attitude, then we've got to have rules in place that can be enforced to prevent the behavior. And that's why it's really important, for example, to make sure we're holding police officers accountable in an effective way. And we're enforcing, for example, the duty to intervene when somebody's going off the rails and, other officers are there just kind of watching. So we've got to start really making sure that we're enforcing these rules so we change the behavior before we have a chance to change the attitudes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously, we're going to talk just real quick about the Laquan McDonald murder. Jason obviously Laquan McDonald and the community were the most people let down by the police accountability system there, with Van Dyke being 27 complaints. But Van Dyke, in my opinion, Van Dyke was also let down because not having the ability to intervene when he was racking up all those complaints from all over the city in a way of either correcting the behavior or finding a way to correct the behavior or separating him from the department is an issue, right? Like our police union chief or president has 50 complaints over 23 years. And the department's tried to get rid of him a couple of times. But people, you can go look on our website for a report on Catanzara. You can see some of his social media posts. There's not a minority group on gender, race, ethnicity, you name it, that he does not have very, very strong dislikes for.
Yeah, well, if you read the charges that are before the police board for him right now, it's just a laundry list of Facebook communications that are rants about pretty much a lot of things.
Yeah.
So unbelievable.
I've been doing this 25 years. I've been in police reform in Chicago since 1996. And even I was like, wow, like there's so much hatred in those posts when you can see them. I didn't show them on the show. You can go see them on our website because I want people to be able to read them. They're disgusting, but Catanzara is not alone on the Chicago Police Department having those feelings. I'm not sure exactly how we root them out. I hope the department's trying. I think it's a lot more. I think people have to understand it's a lot more complicated than they want it to be. Like, it's very easy to fire Robert Baker for being associated with the Proud Boys. It really isn't. It's very complicated. And as being someone who's helped write some of the policy, it's very hard to write policies around these things in ways that make it easy to root out, because they have the right to their beliefs. As you said before, it's that you can't make those beliefs translate into actions that violate rules, but trying to guess what is in someone's head is basically impossible.
Yeah, and it also speaks to how we go about recruiting police officers as well, right? That's a process we're constantly struggling with. I know that the Inspector General came out with a report recently about, the ability to sort of keep candidates of color in the mix in the process. But that's a big challenge as well, and that's a place where I think we need to focus a lot of energy too.
Right. And I 100% agree with you. That report to me was very damning because not Lightfoot, but Rahm Emanuel and Daley have been talking for years. It's all about recruitment. We can't recruit right. Well, actually, you're getting the applicants of color. You're just not able to keep them. So that is less about the community not stepping forward than it is the system set up is failing them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't know, and maybe I know nothing about the psychological screening they do, and I'm not sure if there's a way to enhance that so you can root out white supremacists and through that process, I think that would be something interesting to look at. But I do think recruitment is an issue thing. And, police departments have regularly recruited from the military. And as we see
Right,
with January 6th, with the Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters and how they're all ex-military,
right.
there may be some issues with that also.
Yeah, and I think the challenge there is, again, like, you can't discriminate in the hiring process against someone who has a certain belief, right? We wouldn't want that, right? But you have to be able to discriminate between those who can hold those beliefs, but still be able to do the job, right, in a fair and equitable manner. And that's what's really so difficult.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly, we could probably talk 6 hours on that topic. It's incredibly hard and incredibly complicated. I wish the media would do more nuanced reporting about this. This, like, we're just going to root them out, and then we go on move the next day about totally different stories, and we totally forget about this, rather than having the complicated discussion about, like, hey, how the hell are we going to actually do this? I think the people are being shortchanged. Okay, Sharon Fairly, thank you so much. We really appreciate you jumping on discuss these issues with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
Okay, so definitely a needed conversation. I think we're getting far too little of it in the media about how we're going to do this and how complicated it is. And I would say, first of all, Sharon Fairly, thank you so much for taking the time to do it. I know she's busy. So that's first. Second of all, it's incredibly complicated, right? And you want to throw labels at people, and it's been done in the past towards the people on the left, right? Communists, you're all communists in the 50s. I don't want to repeat that, but switch it where it's the left just throwing labels on people. If he's somehow affiliated, I'm sure they don't have cards saying I'm an official member of the Proud Boys. If he's somehow affiliated, none of those people have committed crimes or committed felonies or not are known felons, and he has friends that are affiliated. I just think it's more complicated than people think about how to root them out. I don't want anyone affiliated with the Proud Boys or any white supremacist organization, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, the KKK, whatever. I don't want any of them to be police officers. Trust me, and I'm not advocating for it. I just think that we need a much more nuanced conversation about how we get those people that have those beliefs either out of the police or have significant oversight over them to make sure they are being fair and equitable as they're supposed to be. But the BS from David Brown about we're just going to root them out, I think is wrong, and I think that was helped by a media that should not have bought into that crapola, because he has no clue how he's going to do it. Sir, what rules are you going to do? What violations? What exactly did this officer do that broke the law? I don't understand. I don't think David Brown knows either, to be honest with you. I just think that he had that rhetoric ready to go.